Mr.ShroomCaster. My name is Emily, and what I'm about to share changed my life forever. This is a story about how good intentions can turn into a nightmare when you trust people you don't truly know. Before all of this, my life was calm and pretty predictable. I'm a third-year student at a prestigious college in Boston. My days were filled with lectures, library study sessions, and exam preparation. But I always knew that at home, peace and quiet awaited me. My small, cozy apartment near campus wasn't just a place to live. It was my sanctuary. I deliberately chose it because dorms, with their constant noise and wild parties, felt like a nightmare to me. My apartment was more than just a living space. It was a refuge where I could truly be myself. My life was highly structured. Morning lectures, coffee breaks with a book or my notes, and evenings spent at home. I loved the stability because it gave me a sense of control. Sure, I had friends, but we didn't see each other very often. I didn't need a big social circle and always valued my personal space. For me, this was the perfect balance, harmony between studying, solitude, and occasional conversations with loved ones. It seemed like nothing could disrupt this equilibrium. But, as is often the case, my desire to help someone played a cruel joke on me. Rebecca was one of my classmates. We never really interacted much, although I was always aware of her presence. She seemed quiet, somewhat withdrawn. She usually sat at the back during lectures, almost never participating in discussions, though it was clear she was paying attention. Her clothing was always modest, understated, but neat. She never stood out, as if she deliberately wanted to stay invisible. I never paid much attention to her until she started reaching out to me. A few weeks before everything happened, Rebecca began approaching me more often. At first, it was harmless questions about lectures or notes. Then she suggested working together on a project. Her offer surprised me, but I agreed, thinking it was just a polite gesture. We started to bond a little, although I wouldn't call it a full-fledged friendship. It was more like superficial acquaintanceship, a few jokes during class, some brief conversations about school. One day, after a lecture, I noticed her in the hallway. She was sitting on a bench, turned toward the wall, clearly trying to hide that she was crying. Her shoulders shook slightly, and her hands were clenched tightly on her knees. I hesitated, unsure how she would react, but eventually walked over. When I caught her tear-streaked eyes, she tried to act like everything was fine, but it was obvious that wasn't the case. At first, she didn't want to talk, but eventually, she admitted that she was being evicted from her apartment. Her voice trembled as she spoke, trying to maintain composure. From what I understood, her landlord had decided to rent the apartment to someone else. She added that she couldn't find a new place to live. The dorms were full, and she had no friends or family nearby to stay with. Rebecca tried to appear calm, but I noticed her hands nervously fidgeting with the edge of her sleeve. Her situation seemed truly terrible. I imagined myself in her place, without a home, without any sense of stability. It was terrifying. I asked why she was being evicted, but she avoided eye contact and said it didn't matter. I didn't press her, though her answer puzzled me. At that moment, I was more concerned about her situation than what might have caused it. I didn't think long. It seemed to me the only right decision was to offer her a temporary place to stay with me. I told her she could stay in my apartment until she found something suitable. Her reaction was so intense that it startled me. She froze, her eyes widening as if I'd offered her something unbelievable. For a few seconds, Rebecca was silent, seemingly unable to believe what she'd just heard. Then, she practically threw herself into my arms. Her hands were cold, unusually so, but I didn't pay much attention to it. She kept saying it wouldn't be for long, that she was incredibly grateful. I felt relieved, thinking I'd made the right choice. At that moment, I couldn't have known that my decision would change everything in my life. For the first few weeks, everything seemed fine. Rebecca was polite, quiet, almost perfect. She helped with cleaning, occasionally cooked dinner, and even brought me coffee in the mornings. I thought I had made the right choice letting her stay. Her presence wasn't intrusive, and it even felt like she was starting to open up. She'd crack a few jokes about her clumsiness when she accidentally dropped something or talk about her classes. Nothing about her behavior raised any suspicion. But that didn't last long. The little things, which initially seemed like harmless quirks, started turning into something unsettling. It began with small moments. For instance, I noticed that she always kept the curtains in her room tightly shut. She explained that sunlight made her anxious. I thought it was just one of her personal preferences and didn't pay much attention. But over time, this habit extended to other rooms. If she stayed home alone, she would draw the curtains in the living room as well. It was as if she was afraid of the outside world. One evening, I came home and found her in the kitchen, sitting on the floor surrounded by knives. She was arranging them by size. Her movements were slow, deliberate, almost ritualistic. For a moment, it felt like I was witnessing something deeply personal, something I wasn't supposed to see. When I asked what she was doing, she simply replied, "Everything needs to be in order." Another strange incident happened in the bathroom. I noticed odd drawings on the mirror, made with soap. They looked like geometric shapes and symbols. When I asked her about them, she smiled and said they didn't mean anything. She appeared calm, but her behavior was beginning to make me feel uneasy. Her interest in my belongings also seemed unusual. One day, I walked into the living room and found her looking through my old photographs. She held them in her hands, examining them as if she were searching for something important. When she noticed me, she flinched slightly but didn't try to hide the photos. Her expression was calm, even distant. "You have interesting friends," she said simply, before placing the photos back and walking away. But the worst moment happened at night. One night, I woke up with the unsettling feeling that someone was in the room. The door to my bedroom was slightly open, and there she was, standing in the doorway, staring at me. She just stood there. Her face was expressionless, but her eyes were studying me, as if she were trying to figure something out. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice trembling. She tilted her head slightly and replied, "I was just checking to see if you were breathing." The next night, I locked my door. I couldn't sleep, thinking about how strange everything had become. Around 3 a.m., I was startled by loud knocking at my door. "Emily, please open the door," Rebecca begged from the other side. Her voice sounded shaky but insistent. "I am scared. I can't be alone." Part of me wanted to open the door and comfort her, but something stopped me. Her presence on the other side felt wrong. I didn't respond. The knocking continued for a few more minutes before finally stopping. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, listening to every sound. After that incident, I started avoiding her. I felt too scared to stay home with her, and even considered sleeping over at a friend's place. Her behavior became increasingly unpredictable. I couldn't tell if she genuinely needed help or if this was something far more sinister. That was the moment I realized I couldn't take it anymore. Something about her was off, and I needed to find a way to make her leave. I couldn't stay silent any longer. After Rebecca knocked on my door in the middle of the night, only to vanish into the darkness, I realized this couldn't go on. Her behavior was becoming stranger by the day, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just quirks or stress. I started noticing how my hands trembled every time I inserted my key into the lock coming home. I didn't know what to expect inside. The sense of safety in my own space had disappeared, leaving only anxiety in its wake. One day, while working in the library with our classmate Brian, I hesitated before bringing her up. Finally, I asked, "Hey, do you know much about Rebecca?" His response made me uneasy. "She used to work at a cafe near campus," he said, pausing slightly. Something in his tone made my skin prickle. The next day, I went to that cafe. It was a small, cozy place with the aroma of fresh pastries and coffee. Walking in, I felt awkward, like I was stepping into someone else's private world. When I mentioned Rebecca's name, one of the employees, a young woman named Carrie, stiffened noticeably. After some hesitation, she agreed to talk. We sat at a quiet corner table, and Carrie began her story. Her words hit me like a punch. She explained that Rebecca had been diligent and polite at work, but completely different at home. Carrie had shared an apartment with Rebecca for a while and had seen the hidden side of this seemingly quiet girl. One evening, Carrie came home to find Rebecca standing on the balcony, holding a knife. She wasn't moving, just staring into the darkness. It looked like she was waiting for something or someone, Carrie said. When Carrie asked what was going on, Rebecca simply replied, "I'm protecting the house." That night, Carrie couldn't sleep. She stayed up, listening to every sound, too scared to leave her room. But that was only the beginning. Carrie recounted how, on multiple occasions, she found Rebecca in the bathroom with a knife. The door would be slightly ajar, and Carrie would accidentally stumble upon her. One time, Rebecca stood in front of the mirror, gripping the knife tightly, her gaze distant and unfocused. When Carrie asked what she was doing, Rebecca replied, "I was just cutting a thread off my clothes or cleaning something in here." But it never felt normal. Carrie also mentioned Rebecca's strange obsession with arranging things symmetrically. She became visibly agitated if anything was out of place. Once, Carrie accidentally moved a cup on the table. Rebecca sat for what felt like hours, staring at the spot where the cup had been, before finally putting it back in the correct position. As I listened to Carrie's story, an eerie sense of familiarity washed over me. So much of what she described mirrored, what I had been experiencing in my apartment. It was even more chilling because I knew this couldn't be a coincidence. Carrie explained that she eventually realized she couldn't keep living like that. She decided to tread carefully, noticing how sensitive Rebecca was to criticism. Carrie started by gently hinting that Rebecca might need her own space, suggesting that living alone might be better for her. Then, she found an apartment nearby and even arranged for the landlord to let Rebecca stay for at least a month. At some point, Carrie simply told Rebecca that the new place was perfect for her. Rebecca agreed to move out, though Carrie said there was something unsettling about the way she looked, something strange and unreadable in her eyes. But the story didn't end there. Carrie later found out that Rebecca had been evicted from that new apartment as well. Something had happened, but the landlord refused to disclose the details. All of Carrie's attempts to find out more led nowhere. After that, she never saw Rebecca again. As I listened to these details, chills ran down my spine. Everything Carrie described was so similar to what was happening in my own apartment that I couldn't convince myself anymore that these were just personality traits. This was something much bigger, something that terrified me. After that conversation, I knew I couldn't let Rebecca stay with me any longer. Something was very wrong with her, and I had to do whatever it took to get her out as soon as possible. Preparing for this conversation was harder than I expected. I knew it was necessary, but the fear of how Rebecca might react left me paralyzed. There was something so unpredictable about her behavior that I couldn't feel safe. Every time I imagined saying those words to her, my mind raced with thoughts of how it might end. She could cry, get angry, or do something completely unexpected. I had no idea what to expect from her, and that uncertainty was the most terrifying part. First, I decided to take precautions. Before talking to her, I hid all the knives and sharp objects in the apartment. Her strange relationship with knives had always unsettled me. I couldn't get the image out of my head of her meticulously laying them out on the floor that one time. It haunted me. I moved everything sharp into a cabinet far from the kitchen, just in case. It felt paranoid, but the thought of her losing control wouldn't let me act otherwise. Next, I asked my friend Jack for help. He agreed to come over and stay near the apartment door during the conversation. I didn't go into details, but I hinted that the situation was complicated and that I wasn't sure how Rebecca might react. Jack didn't ask many questions, though I could tell even he was a little uneasy. Knowing he was nearby gave me some reassurance. At least I wouldn't be alone if things went wrong. When everything was ready, I sat in my room, trying to calm myself down. I had to summon every ounce of courage to face this conversation. I knew I couldn't put it off any longer. My anxiety was growing by the minute, and I understood that the longer I waited, the harder it would become. Finally, I stepped out and sat across from Rebecca. My anxiety was so overwhelming that I couldn't even look her directly in the eyes. I told her she needed to find a new place to live. My voice trembled slightly, but I tried to speak as calmly as possible. I expected anything: tears, anger, indignation, or at least an attempt to convince me to change my mind. But her reaction was unexpectedly calm. She looked at me with a completely neutral expression, nodded, and said she understood. She even thanked me for letting her stay. Her reaction unsettled me more than I could have imagined. I couldn't tell if she was genuinely calm or just masking her emotions. There was something strange about her gaze, almost empty. We agreed she would move out in 2 weeks. I even offered to help cover part of her rent for the first month at a new place, so she'd have more time to find something suitable. She accepted the offer and went back to her room, leaving me in a state of total confusion. Those 2 weeks were eerily quiet. Rebecca behaved completely normally. She was polite, caused no problems, and even occasionally joked or discussed her studies with me. It almost made me believe I had overreacted to the entire situation. But her calmness felt suspicious. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something. 2 days before she was supposed to leave, something happened that sent a familiar chill down my spine. It was the kind of moment that confirmed I was right all along, and it made me realize this story was far from over. 2 days before she was supposed to leave, I returned home from class and immediately sensed something was wrong. The apartment was unusually silent, but not the comforting kind of silence I was used to. Normally, the quiet in my apartment was soothing, almost cozy. This silence, however, felt entirely different. The air seemed heavier, denser, as though someone had been there before me, but had already left, leaving behind an invisible presence. I paused in the doorway, trying to steady my nerves, but the feeling of unease only grew stronger. I went into my room and felt my knees weaken. My things had been rearranged, Books on the shelves, which I always kept meticulously organized, were now scattered haphazardly. Clothes in the closet were mixed up, and some were draped over the doors. But the worst was on my vanity. My jewelry had been lined up in perfectly straight rows, as if someone had spent hours painstakingly arranging them in a manic order. I glanced at my bed and saw my journals, the ones I had kept for years, lying open on different pages. Someone had read them. That realization hit me like a cold wave. My heart pounded, and my breathing became shallow. This had been my personal space, my refuge, and now it felt violated and utterly destroyed. I rushed to Rebecca's room, trying to compose myself. When I opened the door, there was nothing. Her belongings were gone. The bed was neatly made, but the sight offered no comfort. She had left without saying a word. My sense of unease turned into outright fear. I returned to the kitchen and froze. All the gas burners on the stove were turned on. There was no smell of gas, but the sight alone sent a chill down my spine. Was it an accident? Or had she done it deliberately? My heart raced as I quickly turned off the burners. Then I noticed a note on the table. Her handwriting, neat and even, looked disturbingly calm on the stark white paper, making it all the more unsettling. I picked up the note and began to read. There were a few short sentences, one beneath the other. Thank you for everything. I cleaned up a bit before leaving. I hope you feel freer now. You've always been so interesting. It's a shame you never understood me. I think you'll soon understand why things turned out this way. It's always fun to leave something special behind. Thank you for giving me this chance. I hope you're ready for it. Each sentence seemed simple on its own, but together they formed something sinister. Was this a goodbye? A warning? I couldn't decide what she meant. Her words seemed so ordinary, yet they carried an undercurrent of something that made me feel like I had missed something important. Something she knew, but hadn't told me. My hands trembled as I placed the note back on the table. I forced myself to focus. I turned off the gas, opened the windows to let fresh air in. But even as the room filled with cool, clean air, I couldn't shake the feeling that something lingered. It was as if a shadow she'd left behind refused to leave. That night, I barely slept. I tried convincing myself that it was over, that she was gone, and I could go back to living peacefully. But even then, deep down, I knew this story wasn't over. It felt like she had left more than just her traces behind. She'd left something else, something that would stay with me for a long, long time. After Rebecca left my apartment, I spent several days unable to find any peace. The empty apartment, which had once been a place of solace, now felt cold and unfamiliar. Every sound, the rustling of the wind outside, the creak of the old floorboards, made me jump. Her note left an imprint I couldn't erase. I kept rereading her words, trying to decipher what she had meant. Each sentence seemed so simple, yet there was a hidden thread in them that I couldn't fully comprehend. I tried to return to normal life, but it was harder than I expected. The apartment no longer felt like mine. I couldn't sleep at night, afraid that she might suddenly come back. During the day, I tried not to think about it, but every little thing reminded me of her. It was as if her shadow had remained in my home. Eventually, I realized that Rebecca had stopped showing up at the university as well. She had disappeared from our lives, as if she had never existed. When I cautiously asked others about her, most people just shrugged. Some said she might have decided to move to another city. Others speculated that she had taken an academic leave. But no one knew for sure, and that made it even more unsettling. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. A few weeks later, I heard something that made me shudder. One of my acquaintances, who had connections with Rebecca's last landlord, told me that her most recent apartment, in another city, had almost burned down. Apparently, she had tried to take her own life by setting the place on fire. She had been inside, but the firefighters managed to save her in time. At first, I couldn't believe it. My mind painted horrifying images of her sitting in her new apartment, surrounded by darkness, watching the flames consume everything around her. The thought sent a cold sweat running down my back. How could she have reached that point? Why had she done it? Had she really intended to end her life? Or was this just another act that had meaning only to her? The details of the incident were even more disturbing. Apparently, she had locked all the doors from the inside and sealed the windows so the smoke couldn't escape. On the walls, the firefighters found drawings and writings, made with what looked like charcoal. The symbols were chaotic, as if she had been in some sort of trance, trying to say something. No one could decipher their meaning, but even the description of the drawings, as I was told, was terrifying. I learned that she had survived, but her fate remained unknown. Rumor had it that her parents had decided to place her in a specialized institution, but I found no further details. None of our classmates ever saw her again. Her name disappeared from the university's records, as if she had never existed. When I found out about this, I felt mixed emotions. On the one hand, I was relieved. She was now in a safe place where someone could take care of her. Maybe she needed help that I couldn't give her. But on the other hand, the unease never left me. Her note, the strange drawing she left on the walls of her new apartment. All of it felt like part of something bigger, something I would never be able to understand. Sometimes I woke up in the middle of the night, thinking about her words. I couldn't shake the feeling that the note she left me was her way of saying goodbye. But was it really a goodbye? Or was it something else? Something I still couldn't grasp? Her shadow remained with me, and it felt like it would never truly leave. After everything that happened, I realized I couldn't stay in my apartment any longer. Every detail reminded me of Rebecca. The sound of her footsteps, the smell of coffee, even the shadows on the walls in the evenings. The apartment was no longer my home. I moved out, leaving it all behind, but the memories stayed with me. Now, I'm working on myself. My therapist is helping me deal with the anxiety and guilt that linger. Sometimes I wonder if I could have done something differently. Maybe I shouldn't have let her into my life. Or maybe I should have done more to help her. The weight of those thoughts is exhausting. Though I understand her problems existed long before she ever came into my home. My therapist explained that Rebecca likely suffered from a serious mental illness, possibly schizoaffective disorder or PTSD. Her obsession with order, her fear of light, her tendency to isolate herself, and her paranoid behavior could have been the result of trauma. The therapist suggested that something in her past may have profoundly hurt her, leading to destructive patterns of behavior. Knowing this has lightened the burden a bit, but I still can't forget her strange gaze or the words she wrote in her note. They still echo in my mind. What was she trying to say? Was it a goodbye? Or something else entirely? Her shadow still lingers with me. This experience taught me something important. We never truly know what lies beneath another person's mask. Sometimes, even those who appear weak and vulnerable can carry danger, both to themselves and to others. It's important to help people, but it's equally important to remember your boundaries and prioritize your safety. I'll never see Rebecca again, but her story will stay with me as a reminder of how thin the line can be between good intentions and chaos. I hope she finds peace wherever she may be.